Hey guys, I'm going to talk about optimizations today. I've created some new APIs to be able to load another CCB file and to keep that in memory the whole time, so like a menu system and things like that. It's good for that. So I've got load other document, or you can delete the other document, switch to other document, and switch back to main document. So your main document is your standard main file, that's the only thing you normally have in CopperCube, but I've created another one called other, and it's this other one doesn't get deleted. Even when you switch to a new CCB file, the other document stays in memory the whole time. So I wanted it that way because I've got multiple levels and multiple CCB files that I'm going to be loading, and it has a menu system. It used to have a menu system in different scenes. So something like that, but what I found, that was such a problem because I'd have like maybe 10 or 20 or maybe much more different CCB files with this same menu set up. So that means if I find a mistake in one of them, I've got to go back and I've got to open all 20 files and make that same change on all of them. That was I was going backwards and forwards doing it this way for quite a while actually. I got sick of it. This is not really a good way to make a game at all. So if you want something permanent and fixed in your game and you only want to update it once and have it shared across all your levels, then this other document method is actually good for that. I wouldn't use it for loading another level in your game and then deleting it and loading another one. I mean, theoretically you probably could. I have tested it. It does delete the document when you want to, and you can load another version of it, but I wouldn't recommend it for that. If you just got a big game with lots of CCB files, just stick with the standard switch to CCB file. That method, that's the best method. Yeah. So if you got a whole stack of scenes, just put them into separate CCB files and just switch between the. So it'll just load the next one up. It'll just delete the existing scene and then load up this next file and show the scene in that one, and you just move around that way, and it's much better for memory that way. So it just drops everything and starts again. The only difference to that is textures will stay in memory still. They're considered separate, but I've made a change for that as well. What used to happen is get reference count equals to 1. It will check the textures. It means it would load one file with the textures, then it would load the next CCB file after that with the textures. And on that second load, if you're not using those same textures in that level, it'll just be reference count 1, and on the third level it would delete it. So it would remain in memory for 2 levels. That's not very good, so I've changed that. So I'm automatically deleting all textures across CCB files, except for the ones you want to keep. This is, for me, it's a far more optimal way of doing things. So you're not keeping any textures you don't need. I mean, I'll make an API so you can actually delete textures during your game as well and load up new textures during runtime. I mean, I'll do that as well later, but for now, in terms of loading and unloading, it deletes all the textures automatically, except for if the ending is equal to 0, ending of the name. So like texture name 0.png or .jpeg, whatever. So it's like, yeah, was it the 4th or 5th digit from the end? So in other words, if the name of the texture ends with 0, it could be _0 or just 0, it doesn't matter. It'll keep it. It won't ever delete it. So I've got a lot of textures in my game like that where they're shared across all levels. So there's no point deleting and loading them again every single time I'm changing to a new CCB file. It's pointless. It slows down loading time, and yeah, just all unnecessary, very bad for performance. So I've got a whole stack of, on every single one of my levels basically, there's these same textures I use. So I've kept all them. I load them up in the beginning on the at the start of running my game, and then that's it. I've loaded it once and that's it. That's all I do. I just leave them in memory because I'm going to keep using them for every level. So there's no point deleting them. So if it ends in 0, then I keep it. Something like the vignets ends with 0.png. It stays in memory. Then there's no point to keep deleting them and reloading them for every level. So yeah, so the old method, I would have each CCB file would have all the options, you know, all the stuff for your game. But that turned out to be such a terrible way in terms of updating and fixing things. It was shocking, just terrible. It's better to have. It's a bit like creating a function. You create a function with the code you want to run. You do it once, and then all times you want to use that, you just run the function, and it sources back to that one function. So any changes, you just update that function once, and it's updated for all uses of it. So it's the same idea. You only update it in one spot. So there's my menu there. All the menus, not very big, but still, I don't want to keep unloading it and unloading it. And on top of that, I don't want to be editing every single file every single time there's a single change that gets made, which will be happens a lot actually, especially with the menu system. So I'm getting the size down. That was 128 megabytes. I got it down to 67 megabytes now. It's about half. I've removed as much textures as possible, permanent textures in the game. I've removed them from the level, and I'll put them at the start of the game when it loads up. And all I do is reference that location to just apply that texture in memory, the permanent textures I'm talking about, and just put it into the game. So it works pretty good. I've got a little bit more work to do, but yeah, it's pretty good. So I only have basically one level game on each of my CCB files. Okay, at the start of my game, all I do is just load, just put CCB load other doc and put the standard, you know, the full path, and the name of it, and you know, the extension as normal, and it'll then load the other doc with that information into it. So in other words, it loads all my menu systems once across all levels. So that works really well actually. I'll show you that now. So it tells you textures after loading this CCB file 55. There's actually another one that says the number of textures that loaded before this CCB file. It helps to diagnose issues. I'll put that in. There it is. Other document loaded with scenes 6. So it's got six scenes in it. So if I go to options, it goes to the menu system now. So this is the menu system. That stays permanently in menu. This is the other document, I call it. I could have called it, I suppose, second document or whatever, but anyway, other document works fine, and that'll stay in memory permanently for the entirety of the game now, and so that's good. It's best suited for a menu system, not something that's big memory item. I don't think, probably not suitable for that. It says textures after loading CCB file 64. And it's also the only other file that's loaded when I ran my game is the terrain textures, which is fine. That's different levels of detail, so that's normal. I've got different vignettes for different conditions. Well, they load on demand. That's why it says load from file data to vig rain. So that's loaded on demand. It's not even loaded on the start of the game for each level. It's only loaded if you need it, so that's better. That's a more optimal way. It's just stuff that you don't put in your game unless don't load it in until you need it. That's a much better way to do it. Okay, so this is the first start of my game. So I've got all these textures 1, 2, 3, and 4 with all sorts of different textures on it. That they get loaded once on the startup only. So there's that, and I'll add some more later. So that texture is loaded by default, and what I do is I get the name or the directory of the texture, effectively the texture name that the system uses to check if it's loaded in memory before it loads it. That's what happens all the time when you load a texture or change a 2D overlay image. It'll always first check in memory to see is it already loaded, and if it's not loaded, then it will load it. But otherwise it just uses if it can find it, the one in memory obviously is a better thing. So what I'm just doing is just applying some variable names to the directory of the texture image, so the whole address, you know, like c/data-images whatever folder, then the name of the texture.png or whatever, that type of thing. Yeah, so in other words, I grab that and I keep that in memory. So all your variables in JavaScript are by default are global actually, unless they're written within a function, then it won't be global, it'll be local. So okay, so what I just do is I grab that name of the texture that I originally load as a variable, and I just update it as set seed node property. Change the image. So when you do that, change the image, it'll automatically firstly check in memory to see whether it's in memory. If it is, it grabs it and uses that. Otherwise, it will have to then load it. But because it's in memory, it won't have any issue. It makes the loading of your levels so much faster. Of at least 100% faster, I've noticed. Is get all your big textures and load them up in the first instance of your game, and then for each level, you just reference the address of the texture basically, and apply it. It's already in memory, so it takes almost no time at all. So here's my image crop. I'm using cropping different textures. It seems a little bit more performant, I believe, as well. Pretty easy sort of stuff. So yeah, all these little improvements makes a big difference. In terms of loading speed is massively faster, as well as the size of each file is a lot smaller that way, because you don't keep any as little textures as possible in each of your CCB files, because all you have to do is reference where it's been loaded previously, and it will just update it, pretty much instantly. So 67 megabytes, that was 128 megabytes, so it's a big difference, and I'm going to get that even lower as well. Probably get it down to about 50 or less megabytes eventually. So what you want to do is firstly load the other document and input the CCB file location and address and .ccb or whatever it is as in the inside the brackets. Delete other document, you don't need anything in the brackets. Switch to other document and switch to main document, you don't need anything in the brackets, just standard switch sort of stuff. Yeah, it was a little bit complicated actually, because there's a lot of things going on that have to be done in the right way for these to all work properly. It wasn't straightforward, took a little bit of time. It works quite well actually. You can still use, once you've loaded the other document with different scene names, you can still use switch to scene API, and it will actually look up the name of that scene in the other document as well as your main document. In other words, in case either one of the two, it'll just load it up. So that'll work fine. And if you happen to be in the other document, when you want to actually upgrade the main document, it'll automatically know that and make a switch and update it accordingly. You can still use switch to CCB file even in the other document, and it will still work fine as well. So that's some new improvements. I have after a lot of practice on using different scenes, I don't like to use different scenes in my game as much as possible, because it's actually a bit of a pain in the butt. I'm not going to lie, it's really annoying, I find. So if you've got these different scenes, switching scenes, I don't like it. It's not a good system actually. For one, if you're not using my other document method, you're just having lots of different scenes within your main game. Yeah, I mean, all that has to be loaded into memory. I mean, unless you do my texture loading trick and have it preloaded, that will make a massive difference actually. You might be able to load a lot more stuff that way, where you will be able to load a heap more things actually, because textures use up the most amount of memory more than anything. Meshes and stuff, the actual data for it it's not that much. But anyway, using scenes, what happens is on start, before first drawing do something, it'll only run that once on the first time you run it. After that, it doesn't run anymore. So if you had something in there, some checks that you wanted to run every time, it's not gonna work. It's only gonna run once, and then it's gonna play up after that. You're gonna have a lot of trouble with that. Also with sound nodes. Now, I mentioned that variables are global, but actually functions are global as well, which is interesting. So this runs the first time, and it picks up the function to run the sounds for all the scenes, which is crazy. So I'm running these two functions, click and highlight, across all 6 scenes, which is interesting. How does it run? It's because you still need to update the name of the 3D sound node. You can't run a 3D sound node in another scene. It has to be in the scene you're in. So for each of the scenes that you go to, you're going to need to update this the variable for each one. So in other words, if I go to general, click on the general, it will need to update. So once it switches the scene, goes into the scene, switches over, then you'll need to run something like this. Get scene node from name, the existing 3D sound within that scene, and call that the new variable for that global function that was set up once. That function I only set up once for all these scenes. They all run the same function actually, but the actual functionality of the 3D scene sound node has to be updated for the current scene you're in. So that one there. If that makes sense. So yeah, you have to make a few adjustments like that where you have to switch to the scene, and then after, typically I wouldn't do it immediately. Sometimes you get issues with things not updating properly, so just wait like 1 or 2 frames. I typically wait about 30 milliseconds, and then I'll update the whatever I need to update for each of the scenes. And then when you're switching back from each of the scenes back to back to this one again, you'll have to do the same thing again. So if you're going from general back to the other one, you're going to have to do the same thing again, because otherwise all the sound effects will all be stuffed up. I had so much trouble with these bits and pieces over years. Actually, I had this issue and just couldn't quite work out what was going on, but that's what it's doing. There's many different ways you can do this, but this is one way I've done it. So I've got a global function I set up once, and when I'm switching scenes, soon after entering the scene, I will update the 3D sound node to get the current one within that scene only, not the one from the previous scene. Otherwise, you get this error all the time. Can't find scene node, constantly, always coming up. It's extremely annoying, actually. Yeah, so by default, I would just switch to CCB file as much as possible. If you're worried about memory size only, then yeah, you could still keep the one file probably, and if you want to keep, if you're so fussed to keep it into one exe, it's not going to be, no one's going to care about your game anyway. I mean, in terms of getting assets, no one worries about that. You could have one CCB file, create one final exe file with all your stuff in it, and just have a preloader to the main game. I suppose you would have to have 2 CCB files then, so one on startup and one main game, and preload all your textures, and you load it all once and get the reference to each of those textures and apply it to each level or each scene or each CCB file, whatever you want to do. This has been working quite well actually. I haven't noticed any problems with it. Have a test and let me know what you think about it actually. So you got to load it first before you delete it, and you got to load it before you can switch to it obviously, and once you're in it, you can switch back to the main document and switch back as much as you want. But it's really, I've designed it so it's like a menu system or something permanently stays in memory no matter what your game's doing. Even switching between different CCB files, it's still going to remain in memory, so until you exit out of CopperCube, that is. So yeah, it works pretty good. I'm happy with it. It saved me a lot of hassle. So now, instead of updating 10 or 20 files or more, all I'm doing is updating a single file. That's it. That's one file in all situations. It's so much easier. Highly recommend you do it that way. Yeah, and I don't like using too many scenes. For me, my history of it, it's never worked that well for me. On top of that, you're getting the same problems that you have to deal with when switching scenes, is that if you've got to do after X amount of seconds for timer, and then do something after a certain amount of time, and then you switch scenes before that timer is finished, it'll still run that timer after you've switched scenes, and can cause a lot of trouble. You can code around that, of course, so you can say have scene names for each scene, and on that do later, before it runs anything, after the time is finished, just make sure it does another check to make sure, am I still in that same scene, then do what I want to do, otherwise don't do anything. You can just code around that, but yeah, so that's just something you've got to be mindful of when switching scenes. Okay, here's another thing. If you're making a large game with lots of levels, then I've mentioned this before, but definitely make sure you put all your game JavaScript code into one big behavior. And all you have to do, if you've got multiple files, you don't want to be updating each file, the same change every time. All that's completely pointless doing it that way. So instead, you just update the one behavior across all your levels, and for each level, you just go, whenever you make some code change, you just need to go in plugins, reload and verify extensions and plugins, and then all you do is just save the level, and that's updated. It's like literally took, I don't know, 10 seconds. It doesn't really take hardly any time. So that's super easy. And another benefit when using a big behavior with all your code on it is if you get any error messages, it'll actually tell you the line number, the problem. Whereas if you use these JavaScript boxes, it won't tell you the line number, almost never. I don't think. And even if it did, if you're using lots of them, you wouldn't know which one it relates to anyway. So I would highly recommend keep away from using these JavaScript boxes in CopperCube like a plague. Don't use them at all. If you're writing a serious game, only use a behavior, one big behavior with all your code on it. That's like 100 times better, 1,000 times better if you ask me. The debugging will be so much better. The error bug fixing is so much simpler to find where the problem is. It'll give you the line number. It'll give you more information, in other words. And also with debugging and errors, my own compiled binary has a ton more information about errors as well compared to standard CopperCube. So you'll find my version is helps with debugging way more than ever before. I don't think anyone has made such a good attempt to give you more deep information about errors that come through. So for all the APIs, when there's an error, instead of it just saying something simple like silly like invalid scene node, and then you're scratching your head and saying what scene node are we talking about and have no idea, well, or which API did I call that caused the problem? Well, these error messages, I've updated all of them, and it firstly tells you the name of the API that was called, and then the error message. Obviously, if you've already got the node and you're feeding it into an API and it's an invalid, it's not going to know the object that the invalid node relates to because it's invalid. So I can't actually get you the name. I can only give you the name that you're trying to look up. When you look up the node from the name, that's usually the way you do it. Get scene node from name. It'll actually tell you the name of what you're trying to look up that's actually invalid when you do that anyway. So it'll actually give you more detail than before. It'll actually tell you. So you're looking up, get scene node from name texture and say texture didn't exist or you got the wrong spelling or something. This will tell you. It'll actually spell out what you're trying to look up, and so it gives you more information on the problem actually. So I've gone through all the APIs and done it that way. So the error reporting is a lot better actually. So stick with one big behavior. Keep away from the JavaScript boxes in CopperCube, and I probably wouldn't use too many scenes either. I prefer just use to load CCB file because it deletes everything anyway and starts again. It's a little bit better. It's a little bit better for memory, but I suppose you could use different scenes if you want. If you wanted a stack of scenes, you could do it, but you're going to have a real problem with memory. I suppose you could load textures on first load of the scene. You could, but you still got the other textures in the other scenes still in memory. You then probably want to delete existing textures and load the textures for that current scene and keep moving around that way. I mean, that's another way you could do it. It's constantly deleting and loading textures all the time though, but you could do it that way if you're worried about the size of the file or too much memory. So I will make some new APIs to just during runtime delete whatever texture. In terms of loading textures, that's already in the system. There's no need to change anything there. All you have to do is for both 2D overlays and 3D mesh, set scene node material property. Just in terms of the material ID, and then just put the lookup of the address straight away. It'll look that up in memory. If it can find that name with that address, it'll just use that. It won't load anything. So you don't actually need to use load texture and then apply that to the mesh. You can just put that straight in like that. And with 2D overlay nodes, you can just set scene node property, the node image, and just a variable name containing the address, or just directly, or you can just put in the name directory of the texture itself directly like that anyway. So set scene node property image straight in like that, and that'll look it up. And if it's not in memory, then it will load it from that address, or attempt to at least. That should give you some nice couple of hints on how to improve your game performance-wise, memory-wise, speed, loading time-wise. Have a play with the new API, loading the other document. If you've got like a menu system and you want to apply it to all your levels, that's a good way to do it actually. Let me know what you think. Cheers.